You thought a reflector was simple? Think again. Hey guys, my name is Aaron Nace, and you can find me on Phlearn.com, where we make learning fun. And today we're gonna show you some awesome things you can do with a simple reflector. Now, these things are great, and every photographer should have one of these in their arsenal. Basically, reflectors are used to diffuse harsh light or fill in shadows. So anywhere you got that's too light or too dark in your photo, you can use a reflector to even that exposure out. So there actually are photography products called 5-in-1 reflectors, and usually they're a disc internally that has like a translucent fabric on it. And then you have a few different colors for that disc that cover it up. You usually have like a silver and a gold and a white and a black. And basically these are used to reflect different types of light. And those reflectors are really great, but they're not the only thing you can use to reflect or bounce light, whether it's just a giant piece of white poster board, if it's someone's shirt, if it's a bed sheet. Basically anything that light is going to shine through or bounce off of can be used as a reflector. Light is light, and if you can find interesting ways to bounce it off things, reflect it, and shine it through things, that's what's gonna be fun, and that's what's gonna create some interesting portraits. Before you go spending a bunch of money on gear, check out these awesome things you can do with a cheap reflector and a piece of white foam core. So for our first look, we use a softbox to the camera left, and this gave us a nice broad light source that really put some nice light on Angela, but it left the right side of our subject in shadow. So we moved a reflector in from the right side to fill in that light. Now keep in mind that the closer the reflector is to your subject, the more light it's going to bounce and the more shadows it's going to fill in. You can totally hold a reflector with your hand or have an assistant do it. In this case, we just attached them to a light stand with a simple knuckle. So if you do have a studio setup, you can use reflectors attached to light stands. Now a general tip when using a reflector is that if your subject can see the light reflected in the reflector, then the reflector is doing its job. So if you're reflecting sunlight, that's really easy. Basically just make sure that the light is bouncing onto your subject. And if you're using a strobe, be sure to turn on the modeling light and ask your subject if they can see the modeling light in the reflector. If they can see the light bouncing off the reflector, then you're good to go. So for our second setup, we just added to our first. We brought in another reflector and had our subject hold it underneath her chin. And basically what this does is just fill in light from below. Now, oftentimes in portraits, especially if you're lighting from above, you're gonna have dark areas underneath people's eyes and under their chins. So a reflector coming from below is gonna fill those areas with light. So you can see in this setup, we basically have a softbox, we have one reflector to the camera right and one reflector below, and our subject is completely lit with light. All we have to do is make sure to crop in so we don't include the reflectors in the shot, and we're good to go. For our next setup, we use a strobe with no softbox. This is going to normally produce a very hard light. Now, although this light is really nice, if you want to soften it down, all you have to do is put the diffusion panel of a 5-in-1 reflector, put that between your light and your subject. Now here, keep in mind that the closer the diffusion fabric is to your subject, the softer the light is going to be. Now in this case, we are using studio lighting, but you can use this exact same technique when lighting from the sun. If you notice you have harsh light on your subject, simply put diffusion between the light source and your subject, and you're going to be good to go. For our next reflector setup, we brought in a V-Flat, which is basically two giant pieces of foam core that are just taped together. And you can get these at your local arts and crafts store. These serve as great reflectors. They're super large, they're inexpensive, and you can use them to fill in a lot of light. So here we actually wrapped our subject in a V-Flat. We put the V-Flat behind and to the right side of our subject, which created a background and wrapped our subject in light. Again, our main light source is off to the camera left, and this is not using a softbox. And the light source is shining through diffusion. So in this case, we got one 5-in-1 reflector, which is basically diffusion between the light and the subject. And then we have another giant reflector, which is the V-Flat, to the camera right, which is wrapping around our subject as well. So up until now, we've used our light shining onto our subject and using the reflector to bounce that light back to our subject. Now you can also use the reflector to bounce the light and then get to your subject. So in this example, we actually put our light inside of a V-Flat and bounce the light into the V-Flat, and then light comes back out the other side and hits the subject. So when we fire the strobe into the V-Flat, the light bounces around there and then comes out, appearing like a much larger light source. So in essence, what we have is light that's similar to a 4-foot by 8-foot softbox, and this is all done with bouncing and using reflectors. So if you need a large light source in your image, don't forget that you can use a small light source bouncing off of a large object, and that object is going to produce large soft light. And of course, you can always add additional reflectors to fill in some shadows if you'd like. So for our next lighting setup, we're getting really creative. It looks like we've got 3 different lights in this photograph, but really it's just one light and a few different reflectors. So our main light is actually behind and to the camera left of our subject. And this is just in a standard reflector. It's a hard light source that's shining directly to our subject. Now this light is a little bit harsh for a portrait. So to make it softer, we unzip the cover from the 5-in-1 reflector and put the interior diffusion between the light and the subject. Then we used a VFlat to wrap around the left side and front side of our subject. So basically the light's coming from behind the subject, it's hitting the VFlat, bouncing off, and then hitting the front of the subject. So we have more light behind our subject than in front of our subject, which acts as a rim and a fill light. So to catch some of that light, we put another reflector on the right-hand side, which acts as another fill for our subject. So really there's only one light here and it's behind our subject, but the image looks like it's lit from the front and behind. And again, we're using studio light here, but you could do the exact same thing with the sun. We purposely kept our lens zoomed out with these images so you could see all the reflectors in action, but all you'd have to do is get a little bit closer or zoom in and you wouldn't see any of these reflectors in the final photos. And for our bonus setup, this is what I call the angel or halo setup. Basically, we just set the diffusion panel that's inside of a 5-in-1 reflector directly behind our subject and then shine a light into that diffusion panel. This creates a glow of light right around your subject. All you have to do here is overexpose a little bit. All that light coming from behind your subject is going to wrap around your subject, giving it that angel-like glow. Now this is a little bit more of a creative effect, not something you would use on every single portrait, but it's an awesome use for a reflector. All right guys, that's some awesome stuff you can do with a reflector. So before you go spending a bunch of money on gear, be sure to pick up a couple of reflectors, some inexpensive foam core, and play around with your light. You can get so many different looks with one light and a couple of reflectors. All right guys, that's the cool stuff we're doing with our reflectors. Now, if you have your own lighting setups or your own uses for reflectors or any kind of hacks, leave them in the comments down below so we can all learn and grow from your experience. All right guys, that's it for this week. Thank you so much for watching. I'll Phlearn you later. Bye everyone. Today, I'm gonna show you 5 ways a reflector can change your life. You'll never guess these 5 awesome things we can do with a reflector. I'm gonna show you 5 things you can do with a reflector that the government doesn't want you to know.